All right. Hello, everybody. As we begin to trickle in, my name is Paula Carnero Cox. I'm the head of business development and marketing at Wonderbots. I work with our clients and our partners to make sure that everybody understands what's going on in the market, how it is that we're monetizing new technologies, and what the future of work looks like. Because it's budgeting season, we thought what would make sense. A lot of our clients have given us feedback over the course of the last several months that it's really hard to quantify what the perceived value is of AI, what the actual value is of AI, and what it is that the workforce of the future is going to look like. So we thought that we'd approach today's discussion from the perspective of budgeting as a business owner, making sure that you understand how to connect the dots for the business buyers who may not understand the exact items that you're talking about, the exact technologies that you're referring to, and just need to understand the outcome. All right. So when we look at, total cost of ownership of any technological, innovation, anything that we're looking to put into an enterprise at scale, there's a lot of considerations that need to take place. But before we get into the meat of what it is that you're paying for when there's an AI program and an agentic workforce on the docket to consider, let's talk about the evolution of the workforce. Understanding the context behind why we got to an agentic workforce is an important place to start. Some of you might know this from some past webinars, but I am a history major, so I can't help myself but look at the context of where things came from so we can see where it is that we're going. So if we look at where it began, the evolution of workforce was trying to find ways to cut costs in a number of ways. Process improvement foundations kind of emerged as if we do things a little bit more efficiently at scale, if we crunch the numbers all at once, perhaps, before processing each invoice individually, maybe we'll begin to get economies of scale. And so the early advent of understanding how process improvement was going to work turned into process reengineering, BPR often referred to. And what this is about is reshaping the way work is done. Maybe there was early silos in looking at how things were going to connect and how it was that the overall outcome was going to be achieved in the enterprise. So by looking at almost the Visio diagrams of yesteryears, we're starting to take a peek at how the dots connect in an organization and where we could optimize efficiencies by changing the way the process is done, re-engineering the process. Then the internet was born, and everything changed. It changed the way we thought about getting data. It changed about the velocity in which we were looking at things. Context was changing. It wasn't just about what you saw with your colleagues in the office. There was more context to what decisions were being made. And the beginning of outsourcing started emerging as an option for what it was that we were going to do with the labor arbitrage question. So all of a sudden, we had more work to be done. There was suddenly more volume, more tasks to be done, and complexity emerges as a result. So how are we going to get more faster? And one of the options was finding some of the outsourcing options that we see still to this day. Options like India, the Philippines emerged. And later we'll see that nearshore kind of came on the scene too in the Americas with Costa Rica, now Colombia being some of those options. But the beginning of spreading out the work and having it take shape in the form of labor arbitrage for being able to scale faster began to be a material business saver that became part of the workforce planning motion. We then began to see that there was different types of tools that individuals were beginning to use. So not only were we expanding the workforce geographically, but we were also giving autonomy via tools and things like macros and pivot tables and mini automations, if you will, that were the early advent of citizen development that we talk about today. So individuals were beginning to find ways to optimize efficiencies. Today, we see that in the form of ChatGPT or asking some questions on how to maximize the impact of a presentation or an email. But that began, and we began to see sort of this emergence of individuals trying to find ways to maximize their time at the office. The 8 to 5 was no longer enough. How is it that I'm going to make my work life easier individually? And tools began to emerge and techniques that were done on an individual basis. We then started seeing the advent of RPA, robotic process automation, and some of these scripted, rules-based automations that could be done either at a desktop level or begin to be something that we could see at scale. And so as these scripted automations began to emerge, it sort of took that business user with a curiosity to the next level. We began to see the emergence of centers of excellence, places where not only was process improvement being done, the process reengineering, the looking at what it is that we're doing and how to optimize today's process, but now we had the option of adding automation, rules-based automation that could then augment the type of process improvement that we were aiming to do. So the evolution of how the workforce planning and workforce optimization happened included elements of individual optimization, enterprise scale optimization, tools, and reskilling of people. So once RPA came on the scene and it became kind of a household name, everybody had some form of RPA, and the numbers show that with the install base. The Fortune 500, it's almost an 85% penetration, and mid-market is creeping up very, very quickly, exponentially. In fact, we saw the most growth in commercial markets adopting RPA and scripted automation. Once the advent of putting those guardrails in place, beginning to see what it is that you're doing, then machine learning comes into play. And this is where we begin to see the excitement of AI and some of the areas where machines can begin to predict, think, and ultimately ascertain, decide, and augment items that we couldn't do before, mass amounts of data that a human couldn't compute. But with machine learning, we began to see what it was that we were doing in the past to help us make decisions going forward. So once that element was added to some of these early automations, we started seeing that this was picking up. And it really took shape over the last 10 to 15 years, the adoption rate, and really trying to figure out what it was that we could do to maximize those installs, maximize the investments that we were making with RPA. Now, because AI has been so, I guess, just everywhere, right? Not only is AI, a business concept, when we talk about outsourcing, that's a business concept. AI was in the household. All of a sudden, it was something that, everybody was using for everything from recipes to, some of the commercials we see about how to, plan the best date, to really practical applications, making it difficult to, to think of how this is going to spread everywhere, right? And then the elements of the individuals, not only individual at their workstation, it was the individuals using it at home. And how do I bring some of those learnings to the workplace to optimize? So now all of a sudden you have this proliferation of ideas and AI kind of converging at the same time. And generative AI began to be an answer to kind of coagulating and making all of those things connect. So by having generative AI as sort of a tool in the RPA space in the workforce, we could code at scale. We could have coding be coded to code, right? And so it was helping augment that shape and that form that we're doing. But what it was really preparing us for is what we're seeing really in the last couple of months absolutely explode in our clients, in the asks, in the demand, and the questions that we're asking. And that's the advent of agentic AI. And agentic AI is putting all of these elements together, the outsourcing and the human component of the functional tasks that humans are trained to do. Agentic AI is trained to do functional work. The generative AI of making itself better, being able to augment the code and, and make sure that it's expanding and doing what new tasks it's learning to do. It has that element in agentic AI. The ability to offset some of the learnings, the machine learning elements, and understanding what the AI is telling it to predict, prescribe, and ultimately agency, decide, right, and discern. That is also an element. So all of a sudden, everything that we've been gearing up towards and all the different elements of both productivity for an individual and productivity for the workforce are converging with agentic AI. The future of work is seen as machines and humans working together. And so what we're able to see with that is that once they all converge, what does that look like? How do we budget now for a workforce that's tools, that's software, that's humans, and it's all supposed to work together. And that's the question that everybody's asking. That's what leadership is trying to understand as far as ROI calculations in the agentic workforce. So when we start to look at, building the foundation of an AI program, it really is about looking at what's beyond just the fun AI projects, right? Just the pilots and everything that's going into place. It's about taking a look at your governance model, right? And really taking a peek at the fact that everything from security endpoints are understood, that the business users that you collaborate with on ensuring that your security is up to date also encompasses and includes the governance for AI and for the different APIs that you might have to connect, within existing systems. Security comes into play in a different level. This is not only security access of typical, endpoints and software. This is security with user access. Often these agents access systems with username credentials, just like a human would. And so those same applications must be used for all the security to take shape over this new workforce. It's a workforce, not just a software. The other thing is data protection and understanding where it is that you're going to kind of put these guardrails. It's understanding too that this new agent, this new employee, part of your workforce, you have to think about the data protection there too. The access points that it can have, because if there's a flow through and it can make agency and it can have answers to questions that come from data it's not supposed to then give the next party, that's something that needs to be monitored and managed right up front. And lastly, the oversight and drift detection. So drift is the concept of what we said we were going to do and what we're doing not matching, right? The drift from expectation versus reality. Now, why are all those elements that sound like processes and policies in the ROI calculation in building the foundation right? Because those are the elements that are most costly should the program fail. And so it's important to not only plan for building the foundation appropriately, but to look at these as opportunities for you to maximize the investment and get it right up front. Include all the necessary stakeholders so that you're not just building a foundation for a pilot. If the pilot succeeds, which it's likely to, and it's likely to excite and have everybody want to get on board quickly, then it's best to have the governance, security, data protection, and ensuring that what you're going to do and what is actually, capable of happening to avoid drift are the things that you're going to make sure that your promise is. And so when we start looking at AI projects, we always ensure that everybody's taking a look at what's underneath the hood, making sure that we're paying attention to every element that could potentially, ruin the initial excitement that we're hoping to get with these initial early days in AI. So let's take a look at the market size, because it's not nominal. We're really looking to see an increase in this. And this year, just, at Wonderbots alone, it was incredible how it went from idea, concept to initiation across the board at our client sites and with, new clients that we onboarded this year with the excitement of Agentic. We're looking to see, an increase of 43%, almost 50% increase, and that's something that not only are vendors preparing for, but, software, partnerships you're seeing emerge. A lot of the startups that are coming on the scenes with functional solutions are really taking hold because this new agentic workforce model is really about having the industry expertise and the functional expertise of these agents being able to do actual tasks and job descriptions. So we're seeing a convergence of all kinds of software vendors and partners, and really looking that the strategy is in place, right? Because that's the part that needs to get right sized so that the excitement and the scale comes once all those hiccups have been met. So let's talk a little bit about some of the mistakes that we saw this year, right? Some of the things, some of the pitfalls to avoid, and some of the places where you can avoid making some of those costly mistakes up front. And it's not just costly monetarily, it's costly to the reputation of the initiative, right? If there's a lot of naysayers and I'm not sure, and we don't have to do that quite yet, and your pilot's off to a bad start, or some of these guardrails or some of these mistakes are hit, it's hard to overcome in early days. So pilots scale too fast. That goes back to laying the foundation and the groundwork. Once the pilots are done, they're very quick. They, always work, and it's about implementing them right away. And so often when the pilot's excitement isn't followed by the necessary preparation on both the client side, and maybe security to get things installed, that delay and that scale kind of leads to not the greatest of onboarding experiences. So it's really about getting everything in place so that when that pilot hits and everything is aligned, you're ready to scale quickly, and you're not doing it. You don't have expectations that aren't accurately managed. The other thing too is that, it's often a place for the visibility to be seen, and it's often where it's important for everybody to have kind of the same idea and the same understanding. Back to that drift, right? As long as the expectations are managed at every point of the explanation and what it is that you're trying to do in this pilot. Are you trying to prove the capability is there? Are you trying to prove that the technology works? Are you trying to prove that every party that's going to be part of this project and ultimate program can work together quickly and efficiently? Do we have all those, necessary access points in place to be able to do what we have to do in those cases? So there's a lot of that that needs to be done up front, and I think it's avoided a lot. Let's just show that it works before we really look at what it is that we're going to be paying for transparently, what it is that we should be expecting, and some of the access points that we need. The other thing is that it's often forgotten that because it's a technology, the onus is on IT, right? And the spend and the budget and the oversight is often partially, if not all, with the IT owners. And it's important for the business owners to be accountable because they're ultimately the beneficiary. In the new world of agentic, there's going to be a right sizing of the technology benefiting a cost center, for example, and it coming from the cost center's allocation of spend, right? And really truly putting, where's the beneficiary? Where is this ROI truly coming from? So that's why it's important for the communication to happen, because the business owners have to be accountable. If they're not seeing value from the invoice agent that you installed in their area, then maybe it's not as valuable as you think. And that goes back to avoiding drift. And then the other one, of course, is the great big question mark that everybody has, which is that the agent's acting without guardrails. That can be costly. That can show a lack of planning, a lack of governance, a lack of ownership and know-how, and can be costly if there's any data breaches or anything that was exposed, that wasn't addressed in early days. So those are some of the things to take a peek at. Those are some of the questions that came up throughout the course of the year, and a really important and easy win to avoid by getting that communication done right. So why is it that an organization needs an agentic workforce? And we kind of broke it down into three avatars, if you will, of an organization. And it's really about right sizing the back office. It's still about right sizing the back office. The history of BPO, the history of all of this is still about right sizing the back office. And benchmark data will quickly give you a good clue on what your spend should be on a workforce for the back office, relative to your revenue. And if those numbers don't align, it's probably likely you can optimize, or you can get that right sized and more healthy as far as benchmark data for sustainable growth, with the advent of a workforce, an agent or two being added to the mix. Now, it doesn't have to be an entire overhaul. There can be, surgically implemented agents to help augment a certain process or take over a meaty part of volume that maybe is required on the front end of computing. So if you're back office is not aligned to the revenue. In standard benchmarking, we often find that's a great place to look. The other thing is revenue leakage from customer experiences or front office returns, or any number of things that could come from the front office are being addressed very quickly and efficiently with agents. Now, we know that there is the malaise from the press zero to speak to an agent, speak to an agent, speak to an agent. And I think the marketing and branding of this whole agent thing is going to take a while to get over that, that experience that many of us have had. But an agent that can actually action some of the items that you call about and get it done, just by accessing the right data, understanding what your profile is, and being able to operationalize the customer experience. That's a new form of agency, and that's a new form of using agents. So it's a great place to take a look at your Know Your Customer programs, the front-facing interactions that you have with customers, partners that could imply an increase of revenue, an increase of repeat business, an increase of repeat customers, with some of the metrics and activity that show for that. The other thing too is that understanding that everybody is looking at this, right? We saw the numbers of what the adoption is looking to do, and just in our experience in the ecosystem, that's Wonderbots, we're seeing just a tremendous adoption rate, and just a quick understanding. The buyers and users are just so much more sophisticated than they were in the RPA days. So there's far less education. It's far more about just adoption. How do we do this? And so an organization that knows that they must compete, that knows that they must stay on the cutting edge of technology, both for attracting new hires and great candidates for their workforce, but also to make sure that they're competitive against their competitors. It's really important to make sure that that there's this forward thinking workforce planning, and that includes agents. So most organizations are kind of falling into one of these categories, the real quick early adopters that we've seen, and these are great reasons to explore an agentic workforce. So with the early adopters, we've heard a lot about this build or buy concept, and there's a lot of different ways to do this. Us Wonderbots, for example, we say we've built it for you, so why don't you buy this and try it, and then as you want to scale, you can kind of move over to that build side. The challenge with building is the time it takes, the learning cycles, the mistakes, oh God, we have to recode it. Oh, that was a wonderful way to do it. Wish I would have known that sooner. And so when you're building, any new technology, anything, even if you're pulling out, furniture to build with, a roadmap, it's always going to take a bit of a learning curve. Whereas if somebody has done it a million times over, that's muscle memory, it's going to get done. Or in our case, we pre-build, some of these agents too, and have them ready to deploy. So it really is just about speed and kind of the proficiency that you have in your organization. The builders tend to be organizations that have always built their mainframes, or have always done their homegrown, systems, and have always done things in-house. Those tend to be the ones that that can quickly build, because there's frameworks in place and really good patterns for them to follow as far as how they set up their systems. So it really is an organizational dependent thing. There's not a right or wrong way. It's really about what you're trying to show, how quickly you're trying to show it, and what stage in the acceptance that Agentic is here your organization really is in. And so what is agentic AI? We've had all these different kinds of AI being mentioned over the course, and we've really just kind of, pared it down to some of these imageries, like the cars, the iceberg. And really, it's just kind of to personify these ideas, because it's a hard concept to think that you're going to be working side by side with an agent, So if you think about it, it's sort of like the fully loaded, the fully autonomous agent is what agentic AI is. And this is the functional worker. This is the person that can step in and do a functional role, like process all the invoices, for an organization, or who can make sure that every vendor setting is onboarded correctly so that it can be processed automatically. So tasks and functional roles, and making the decision to say, oh, we don't have all the information that we have here to process this invoice, so I'm going to kick this back for approval. But the ability to autonomously do that without being programmed to make decisions that are if-then statements, that's what we're talking about when we say agentic AI, right? What we have seen mostly is most people are kind of in this middle of the road place, right? Where they've done some RPA, they've had some Gen AI success, maybe of even code, developing code, but maybe haven't gotten to that complete autonomous place. Maybe haven't gotten to the part where we're doing true orchestration of these agents, of these people, and these processes within the organization. And the cool part is that with the advent of agentic AI is that you no longer have to just start at the base model. You can actually just start with the agentic AI models, and get started with agents really working in the functional spaces, right? But of course, it is still possible if you are in that build range, to start with the foundational, groundwork there too. So imagery, as we continue to explain these novel concepts. And so where are people using agentic? So again, if you kind of think of these as personified little agents, these are the places that we're really seeing this. And HR is one of the easy places. It's a great place both for the recruiting side of managing the different types of candidates, scoring them, keeping them, as backup when new opportunities arise at the organization. We're really seeing HR use it for, the management of talent. There's been a lot of talk about how horrible HR has gotten with recruiting and not, kind to the candidate, and, all these auto sends, and it really kind of turned robotic. And so ironically, by adding agentic to some of those processes, we're able to put the human back into HR. And so HR is really adopting this concept to continue scaling. And then intakes internally, right? We're seeing a lot of use of it internally, being able to manage, anything from, time off, vacation, workforce planning, the ability to do and have more succinct conversations, especially with large organizations, global organizations. We're seeing streamlining, the communication and the access to information through HR agents on the people side too. Operations is a no-brainer. Where there is data, there is an opportunity for an agent. So access points of everything from supply chain all the way to loading, shipping, any type of element that's an operational workflow that either touches money, touches cost, is a great place to start. Ensuring that everything is accurate, that it's on time, that it's adhering to contract standards and SLAs. Anything that has those types of parameters that a human would perhaps have to check, recheck, make sure the rules are set perfectly. An agent is a great place to be able to supersede some of those decision-making points that might be overlooked. Finance and accounting, bread and butter of everything automation. Every single element of workforce planning begins and ends in finance and accounting, because the more your business scales, the more your back office, has volume. And so as volume increases, the great answer to the back office is that the back office should never grow as your business grows. And once you can get a fully loaded back office, not just for today, but plan it for tomorrow, a fully functioning back office, then it doesn't matter how much you scale. In fact, that's the great answer to it, is that as you scale, your back office should continue to support, and with agents, that is possible. And last but not least, when we talked a little bit about this call center, big early adopters and agents. Again, oftentimes because they've had some very robotic practices over the years and trying to find efficiencies. And there's certain places like HR and call centers that, as robotic as you want to make an automated system and a press 1 and a press 2, it takes away from the spirit of what that function is for. And a call center spirit is to ensure that you are connecting with your clients, right? Connecting with the place that is producing revenue. And so call center has been a big adopter in finding efficiencies, streamlining ways to get access points for the customer. And so we've really seen a lot of uptick in those areas, a lot of demand for agentic workforces there. So in the future of agentic, we can't go without explaining the type of skills that matter. And you're seeing this across the board in interview practices and thought leaders that are, that talk about HR and the different types of skills of the future. It's really more about, pause and take a look and make sure that some of these elements are really being looked at, right? Empathy, understanding that you can take a look at something and see it from multiple angles. As we begin to infuse empathy, in an agentic workforce, the human elements that make us human and are able to make these decisions, like, hey, maybe human resources should be a little less robotic, right? Hey, maybe we should, look at the call center and make sure that we're being kind and understanding to our customers. And if they call, they shouldn't be in a continuous loop of hell to try to get back to zero to speak to somebody. If that's what we say we do, is that we speak to our clients, right? And so really taking a look at how that goes. Judgment from the perspective of what's right and what's wrong. What are we looking for? Let's take a look at the people problems that we're having in the workforce, and not just how much the bottom line is. If the bottom line can be managed by having a right-sized back office to the revenue growth, then some of these things we can really start focusing on that make our workforce culture what somebody would want to join as well. It's not just about attracting talent and having the technology. That's table stakes these days. It's about having a culture of humanity, a culture that makes sense, that takes away work that is mundane by having an optimized workforce of agents, but also having the time and the dedication to look at some of the other elements there too. And then, of course, communication too. So, more and more I've been interviewing, and it's shocking, some of the communication, I guess skills that I thought were just obvious, right? And just were things that we had to do that just aren't as, prevalent, in the new workforce. And I think it is because we zone into our computers and our, tablets and our phones. But that more and more has to be time to lift our heads up. And if we have agents helping us with the machinery, then again, we can go back to the basic human elements. So we would be remiss to not mention some of these, elements of reasoning and discernment and truly human qualities are what are going to emerge, in the future of work. So we always like to kind of take a look at, when is it coding? When is it, when is it consoling? And often in the future of work, it's a little bit of both. So agentic process management, this is a white paper that we issued earlier this year, co-written by our CEO, Steve Laval, and Bhavyesh Varani. And I wanted to go back to, just the main concepts here. Just to reiterate the importance of that foundational groundwork when approaching an agentic workforce. It's just so crucial to the success and the longevity of the program and ultimate workforce. It should just become business as usual. But to get there, it's important to have this foundational concept, kind of at the front of your mindset as you're talking to stakeholders, as you're getting people on board in the organization to join. And that's really about, first and foremost, orchestration. It's making sure that all the elements that we're bringing together, the humans, the workflows that the agents are performing, any of the escalations that may be required in a process that's being managed by both agents and humans and existing systems, and that they're integrated with whatever, existing platform systems, processes that are in place. So the orchestration layer is really important. That's both a technology and a concept. So orchestration is both, something to procure to help you, truly, physically orchestrate. And it's also a concept of ensuring that the business stakeholders and the owners of these different elements in the organization are also orchestrated. And that they're integrated. Fidelity is really ensuring that the intent of the program is being delivered. This is really looking at some of the tracking along the way, making sure that what we say we're going to do matches what we said we were going to do. It was back to that concept of avoiding drift, right? And so making sure that what we promised is truly what we're delivering, making sure that the intent is overseen. It's that the spirit of the agreement and that the actuals are matching up to what we said the spirit of the agreement was, right? And we do that through dashboarding, communication and frequent check-ins. So each organization requires a different process for ensuring fidelity, but the concept of making sure that everybody understands that the goals that we set and that we are on track to meet those goals, the milestones required, are all being met and everyone's on the same page as we move along. Stewardship is a level up from sponsorship. In the RPA days and in those early days, that we were talking about kind of the adding of different elements for individual productivity and productivity of the organization, it was really about making sure that you had sponsorship of doing things better and in a different way. And stewardship is a little bit more accountable. So stewardship is not only having the leadership that supports the program, but really guides and ensures that it gets to where it's got to go. Making sure that the other stakeholders that are perhaps beneficiaries of the automation of the agent, of the new process, are clear. They have transparent data about what's happening, about what will happen, and what kind of outcomes they should be expecting. And that they have, a two-way conversation streak to give both feedback and enhancement suggestions, or talk through anything that might be missing the mark and what they expected some of these items to do. So really in this concept of an agentic workforce where everybody has to work together, it's important to make sure that everybody's on the same page, and stewardship is there. So again, those foundational components are just so important to making sure that we get to where we're going. So the agentic journey, in a nutshell, this is kind of what we've been helping our clients see, is really taking a look at, what it is that you need to make sure that your agentic program, your agentic workforce is set up for scale, right? And so like we said, you can always start with a pilot as long as you are quickly and ready to move on to scale, because the excitement is just so much faster than some of the early RPA programs of, let me show you that I can program this to do what I say it's going to do. These move a lot faster. They generate so much more excitement. And we're just seeing that the scale story has to happen pretty quickly. Once the scale begins, then you start to optimize some of those elements, right? So each agent, an invoice agent, is going to process invoices. It's going to read, it's going to process, it's going to pay, it's going to record. And ultimately, it does what it needs to do, but there might be nuances or elements of a contract that might be slightly different for a certain subset of, of invoices that have to be processed. And so those optimization elements are what we're talking about when we say optimize. It's not optimizing for the sake of the functional worker being programmed. It's optimizing it to adhere to what we have to do with your systems. Of course, there is then the option of integration, right? So if this is taking over an existing system, that's one thing. But if it's working together with another system, maybe an existing ERP or a current process that your organization has in place, we ensure that all the integration points are done, from a streamlined perspective as well, making sure that we've got everything, adhered to in that capacity. And then once the agentic workforce begins, once there's an agent in place and some of these systems are connected, often we've seen that agents are added to organizations that already have some sort of automation program, some sort of foundational infrastructure for automation in place. It's not often that we're seeing bespoke agents added just yet. I think that will change. But then you have to get to the point of innovation. And so the reason innovation is there is because often you'll start to see that with the add of an agent, it could imply the removal of some of the other technologies. So innovation implies not only perhaps retooling, replatforming, reframing some of what you had, if it makes sense, but it's also about innovating the existing processes to maybe do some of the enhancements. Maybe you had bolted on natural language processing and now we have an agent, right? So there might be some enhancements to the technology that you have interacting with some of these agents that could be optimized as well. And really taking a look at where you are, as an organization in adoption of technology. It speaks highly to kind of how this should be approached and how to think through some of these elements. All right. So the future of agentic AI, right? So enterprise application, we're starting to see some of what we will what we'll be looking at, right? So task specific agents, we'll be seeing those continue to increase. You know, the idea that you know, that individuals will be contributing to what the organization has in place. We're going to see more and more of that. The contribution of functional workers, especially as some people are retiring out of legacy roles and they have that tribal knowledge on how things are done. These are wonderful areas for interaction between agents and, you know, and the next generation of workforce that will be taking some of those roles and responsibilities over. And then we'll start to see that, you know, the ecosystems across multiple platforms, multiple functional areas are going to continue to connect, right? And so as we see that great connection, the need for orchestration and the levels that support that orchestration continue to be more and more important. All right. So thank you so much, everybody, for attending, for being here. I know a couple of questions came in, and I will now pause this real quick to make sure that we answer some of those. Okay, so and I think we addressed some of this here, but somebody had asked, how are we proactively budgeting for agentic solutions? And so here's how we're kind of seeing it. So the the way that people traditionally had looked at this was infrastructure, software, and then implementation costs. So the services and the people associated that have to you know, that have to kind of take that on. What we're seeing though, with kind of proactively budgeting for this, is that you look at this truly as an FTE. We're at the reverse engineering stage. So if finance and accounting is projecting to have to hire a headcount of 5 more people, then that's the opportunity to say, okay, the budget for 2, let's take 2 agentic. Because then that way you're continuously optimizing the workforce planning and you're in the budgeting at the right place proactively. Now, what it ultimately takes away from in IT expenses, maybe data center, you know, CPUs, that you'll begin to see down the road. But in initial proactive planning, we've recommended to truly, for once and finally, actually look at this as FTEs, and budget accordingly along the way there. And the last one that came in was, what are average costs looking like? So, and that's a tough question. It's one of those, it depends. But average costs for year 1 is looking like anywhere between 50,000 to 100,000 for the agent, right? So for the functional agent, depending on what it does. So, and I'm saying average for the agent. Once, and that would include like the build and all of that. But once you finish building it, then your annual, you know, rate, it doesn't need to, you know, tack on too much more. So it's truly like planning a workforce planning of, you know, this FTE without inflation, without cost of living increase, without anything, you know, maybe just storage or something like that, or inflation to the vendor that you're purchasing it for, but just a software inflation number is what you can expect for a year-over-year budget. So it gives you the ability to finite, you know, to have a finite budget on what that expense would be for that functional access. You know, that functional worker to be accessed. All right. Well, I think I addressed the 2 questions. Thank you so much, everybody, for your time and attention. And like I said, you're free to reach out if you have any other questions. We'll be sending along the PowerPoint. And if you want to connect with me directly on LinkedIn, or anybody at Wonderbots to talk through next steps or thinking through the budgeting for Agentic, please let us know, okay?